It's the Political Free Agents, and we're back for our Sunday episode here. Looking forward to this one. What's going on, Chris? Mike, how you guys doing?
Good, brother. Good, man. I'm excited about this one as well. It's always a great day when Mike, leads off the introduction to someone that's impacted his life. Especially someone like Mr. Steele, who we have on. I'm going to let Mike, continue to kind of lead the call and the introduction, but just know that I'm excited about this, fellas.
Yeah, I am as well. Mr. Steele, I caught up with the documentary again today. Mike had me watch it a while back, and I watched it again today just as a refresher. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to this episode. Mike, why don't you give an introduction to Mr. Steele here?
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to reiterate to you, Bill, how thankful I am for you to jump on the podcast. So, I was telling these guys, when I was in the Marine Corps, towards the end of my career, I started really looking into, why I was doing what I was doing, how the world worked, and why, what was going on in the country. And I came across your work and your documentary, The Money Masters. So, Bill still is somebody that, Bill, you're somebody that's definitely had a significant impact on my life and how I view the world and where I see things going and why I see them going. Just to give everybody a brief overview, Bill's the creator of the documentary, The Money Masters. You can find it on YouTube, The Secret of Oz. His book, No More National Debt, is a great book for anybody that's interested in the history of money in the U.S. Especially in libertarian circles, when it comes to the issue of money, the issue of the Federal Reserve, and why we're in this financial situation that we're in now. Reading that book will do you a lot of. It'll benefit you a lot, because Bill brings up a lot of points in that book that are kind of counter to what the traditional, mindset is from a libertarian perspective when it comes to what money is, the gold and silver, traditional money, what the Constitution basically says money is. And, those conversations really need to start happening again if we're ever going to figure out how to fix what's going on in this country. So, Bill, I just want to say thank you for taking the time to come on the podcast. And, with that being said, what I kind of want to start with and get your perspective on, and just kind of let you jump in and kind of educate us on a little bit is, so we're in this position we're in today, and it's been a long history over the last 100 plus years, if you ask me, from where this whole thing started, going all the way back to the founding of the Federal Reserve, and even prior to that. If you could kind of educate us a little bit and give us a background on what is the central bank, how many central banks were there prior to the Federal Reserve being created in 1913, maybe a brief history as far as the families behind the central banks, and then kind of explain and go into what debt-based money is and what fractional reserve banking is. And then we can kind of go from there and talk about why that's even important to know.
Then we're going to go from there, huh? Okay, yeah. Well, that'll take me about 3.5 weeks to complete your list. So just give me one question at a time. I'm an old man. I can't keep all that in my mind.
Okay, gotcha. All right. Well, why don't we start with what is the Federal Reserve?
The Federal Reserve is the privately owned central bank of the United States. It's not a Treasury Department. It's a privately owned function because our money the quantity of our money is controlled not by an electable official of the United States, but by this private group of essentially bankers called the Federal Reserve System. The main mantra for what my money philosophy it's not what backs the money that's important. It's who controls the quantity. And right now, no elected official, no elected representative of us controls the quantity of money.
And that's important.
Of unelected bankers called the Federal Reserve System controls the quantity of money.
And controlling the quantity of money is such a keystone important idea, because the control of the quantity is essentially the control of the value. So if a private institution controls the quantity, they essentially control the value that the money represents over time. So I look at it as gold and silver over thousands of years. You could even argue kings and people that controlled mines have always controlled the quantity of money, even if it was gold and silver. And so when the Federal Reserve took over in 1913 and essentially took control over the quantity of money, they essentially took over control of the value of the money of the United States. Is that by being able to manipulate interest rates? Is that a fair assessment? Controlling the quantity essentially determines the control over the value of the money?
I have to think about that over time. I'm not sure that I would agree with that, because there are other factors at play. But for the time being, let's just say, yeah, that'll work.
Okay. Well, the reason why I say that is because I've listened to you for so many years now that and just going back through the history of how the Federal Reserve got created and the Rothschilds and the families behind it. Money is nothing more than actually, let me ask you this: what's your definition of money? I'd love to know what your definition of money is, and I'll give you my definition of money.
A medium of exchange upon which individuals in a sovereign nation agree upon.
Okay. I would actually, I agree with that. I actually break down the definition a little deeper. So my definition of money is an agreed upon medium of exchange that exchanges time value. So,
you're basically a gold bug. That's where you're coming from, and I reject that totally.
You reject it?
Yeah. Gold, and at least for the past few hundred years, has not successfully worked as money. I'll tell you why. For example, we were on a gold only money system,
right,
during the 1920s, when the Roaring Twenties. Did that prevent the outrageous leveraging that brought about the Roaring Twenties, this huge thing on the stock market that where the stock market went wild and went up and then crashed? No, it did not. It did not successfully control the quantity of money there, because money became leverage. Money became credit, extended by brokerage firms for people playing in the stock market game. So
right.
Gold did not control the quantity of money there. Did gold control the quantity of money in the following decade of the 1930s, when we had the deepest depression in the history of the United States, when the quantity of money was deliberately reduced by the Federal Reserve by 40% to cause the Great Depression and extend it? No, gold did nothing to prevent that.
100% agree with you. So I'm actually not what you would call a gold bug. All I was saying is that my definition of money doesn't matter what the money is. So the way I see gold for the last couple of thousand years, gold has been the best form of money, and this is, gold bugs say this all the time, but the reason why gold is the best form of money is because it transcends time, right? So that's all money. Money is nothing more than a human construction that people use to communicate time value. It's actually more of a language. Money is more of a language than anything else. So human beings have needed something to communicate our time value between each other, whether you're a teacher or a book, a carpenter or whatever. And so that medium of exchange, human beings have used over thousands of years as far as gold is concerned, because it transcends time. You can stick an ounce of gold in the ground for 5,000 years and pull it out of the ground, and you'll still have that same ounce of gold, right? But that doesn't mean that something else can be used as money, right? Human beings have used plenty of other things, like you said, tally sticks, seashells, gold, silver. Now we have Bitcoin. The point is that I agree with you when it comes to, it doesn't matter what backs the money. It just matters of, who controls the quantity. The quantity control is the key piece. The quantity manipulation has been the key piece when it comes to the issue of money throughout all of human history. Who controls the quantity controls the value of the money. So I agree with you 100%. I'm not a gold bug. I do believe that gold is a great form of money because it transcends time. But I also believe in things like Bitcoin, which is based on math, and distributed ledger and all, and the technology, which is something that's brand new, right? Because we're in the technological age. But I don't want you to think that I'm stuck in the whole gold bug mentality. All I was asking was, my concept of what money is more of a, the basic concept is, how do we transfer time? Time is the most valuable commodity that a human being has. Most people don't realize that until they're a lot older in age. But, if you ask anybody, what's the single most inescapable fact of every human being is the fact that we'll die one day. So that means that time is the most valuable commodity that every single human being has. So if time is the base layer of money, then essentially who controls the money, whether it's the Federal Reserve or we the people or whoever, they control the value that money represents throughout society. And so, your work has led me to that conclusion, right? So I just wanted to get your thoughts on a few things, and the point of this conversation really is just kind of go from point A, which is the control over the money left we the people and got put into private hands, and how they've constructed that system that currently exists through fractional reserve banking, debt money, and then where we can kind of go from there once we all understand what the key problem is. I personally believe that the keystone problem in all of society, whether you're talking about on a global level or this country by itself, is the control over money and what that money ends up being. And I want to get your thoughts on that when it comes to, when it comes to what the Federal Reserve is, what their system of money is, and how we're not benefiting from that as a society, and just kind of get you to, just help explain how that all works in your own words. So I know that was
this is debates over the definition of money are really not very useful. It seems like to me, to the average person. It's to me the thing that's useful is, how do we get out of this? How do we fix it? What's the situation we're in right now? And we're in a situation where, for example, I just put up something yesterday, and another interview, actually put it up early this morning, and got into a bunch of debates, or started gold bugs tried to lure me into a debate, let's put it that way, in the comments section about all this, the definition of money and stuff. And I just don't care about that. All I care about it is trying to get across to the American people how easy it would be to fix this situation. Mm-hmm. And here's how we fix it. We're obviously going into a parabolic increase in the debt right now. At no time in history has this been more apparent. And it's been Trump's only option right now until he gains re-election. But once he does gain re-election, I don't think he's going to attempt to return to a gold standard. I think he's going to go with the monetary reform notion of sovereign money, where the sovereign nation issues its money without debt. Right now, what the Fed tries to do is convince the public that in order to have money, you have to borrow money. And that's just not the case. In fact, that's not what this nation was founded on. This nation was founded on we can create our own money, and by creating the quantity that's appropriate to minimize inflation, we can have our own money without borrowing it, and it worked just fine. And nothing else could have worked to found this nation, because the British tried to force us on. They tried to outlaw our own money, continental currency, which was just script created out of nothing and printed up, and people agreed to exchange it because they didn't want to go with the British gold-based system. And so the Brits outlawed our own sovereign money and tried to put us back onto a gold standard. The Tax Act, for example, was a tax to be paid only in gold. And since the colonies didn't have any significant mining capability at the time, we had no gold or silver coin. So, or none that was significant. And so really our only solution, our only way to escape the British was to just create our own money and agree this is going to be our money. We're not going to agree to use a British gold or silver coin, and that's it. And that was freedom. That was America's escape. That's the essence of American freedom. And so what they've done now is put us back on a debt-based monetary system where all money has to be borrowed into existence. How does that work? Well, the government says, okay, we need $1 billion. And so the Fed prints up $1 billion worth of bonds, U.S. notes or Treasury notes, or T-bills, that is. And primarily the bonds are longer duration, and the notes are the shortest duration. And then they sell those into the open market at a certain amount of interest. And that's how we get our money. And that's how we get all of our money. And the problem is that although the debt initially appears to be small, it starts building up over time. And at this point, last year, we had to pay $450 billion in interest on this debt. The next year, we might have to pay $800 billion. That's more than we pay for the Defense Department in its entirety. And this is talk about recurring revenue. This is recurring revenue that never goes away and always gets bigger. So if you're the one issuing this money, it's a pretty good deal for you, because you've always got the good faith and credit of the United States to depend on the fact that they won't go bankrupt and they're going to pay their bills. They're going to pay the interest on the debt. So we're in a bad place now. And yet you have congressmen still inanely using as a political point, saying that, well, if I get into office, I'm going to, sponsor legislation so that we start to pay down the national debt. That's an impossibility. You cannot pay down the national debt.
And that's a very, and it's such a basic, but fundamental point that you're making right now is that this is a question of math. Once they started creating money as an interest-bearing debt, they essentially started down a mathematical road of exponential growth of debt. Because on day one, when there's zero money, once you insert that first dollar or note of debt and it's due plus interest, then you start a cycle that requires that debt to grow over time and that money supply to grow over time. And so eventually what happens is you come up to this confidence barrier of math where everybody loses faith in the money because of the way that the system is mathematically set up. So that's the most fundamental point that you're making, in my opinion, is that, you know, this system of debt money, of borrowing money into existence, is mathematically flawed and requires the system to essentially self-destruct over time, because the money supply has to inflate over time. And so
even better, rather than self-destruct, even better, it just one way or another normalizes the American population to becoming debt slaves.
Correct. Yes.
And you know that, and
we're there
then
now, right?
they can just try with all their might for their nation not to collapse, but it's inevitable. And so the solution is really easy, and that's you don't want to you want to go back. Well, let's have a little show and tell. So this is the money system that we're under right now.
Right.
It's called the Federal Reserve Note. Note that the difference between this and the other form of American money is the little seal here. This is the green seal of the Federal Reserve Note. Now here is a form of money that's much older than the Federal Reserve Note and upon which essentially our nation was founded. It's called the U.S. note. See across the top, a United States note?
Yep.
But look, it's got the pretty red seal. This is good money. This is bad money. This money is still legal tender. It was never removed from legal tendership. There's about $450 million of it still technically in circulation, but as soon as the 1994 Regal Act prevented these from being normally reprinted, the normal reprinting cycle, and made it so that only these could be reprinted. So what happened? Immediately, all the collectors who knew it was happening, and including all the bank tellers, snapped up every single one of these red seal notes that they could find. And they now go for, 5 to 10 times face value. So anyway, so how do we get back to this? This is money without debt. Just simply printed. Printed. Oh, terrible. Printed for the benefit of we the people. At no debt. How do we get there? This is how we get there. We said as the bonds come due, and bonds, I'm using the term bond to include treasury notes and T-bills, all of the indebted money, run anywhere from weeks of duration to 40 years in duration. Fortunately for us, the vast majority of this debt is the shortest forms. So therefore, it would be the quickest and easiest to pay off the majority of. Mr. Trump, in fact, in the final 4 years of his presidency, could make this switch without any negative effect on the market, and probably a big positive effect, simply by paying off the debt as it came due. He could make the switch from bad interest-bearing money to good debt-free money simply by paying off the bonds instead of in Federal Reserve notes or their electronic equivalents, United States notes and their electronic equivalents. That's it. If you didn't tell people what you were doing, no one would know the difference. They'd just say, 1 in 1,000 would say, didn't money used to have a green seal, but now it's got a red seal? Huh, okay, good. It wouldn't make any difference other than the fact that as you paid off the debt with these instead of these, the debt would disappear. So in 4 years, it's been estimated that 57% of the debt as of last year, and I don't know with this new amount that's being borrowed or not borrowed or whatever, 57% could be paid off. In other words, Trump could eliminate 57% of the national debt, the first president to do almost anything on that in a 4-year time period. And of course, once that happened, and this was made as a political issue, and people said, yes, indeed, he actually did pay off 57% of the national debt, and gee, guess what? The economy thrived. So what do you think the next guy is going to do? He's going to run on that and going to continue the process. So eventually we could completely get out of this national debt system, but not under the Federal Reserve System, only under the U.S. note system. And that's the essence of my presentation, and I will now go back to sleep.
I think the pushback that you would get from that, and obviously this is the pushback that the gold mug community gives, is there's no quantity control mechanism even in that type of system currently, right? So it would.
You know what it requires? It requires common sense.
Right.
Yes, it requires that the government does not go down another suicidal path.
Correct. But now you're talking about eliminating a portion of what it is to be a human. So there are always going to be bad actor humans. There are always going to be people that care more about their own personal gain over the good and well-being of the rest of society, and those people will always figure out a way to infiltrate the levers of power in the government, outside the government. So unless there's
absolutely, you have to make the monetary reform, and who controls the quantity of money, a major political point in every federal election. How much money is there? How much money is being printed, et cetera, et cetera. Just like the folks in Guernsey. If you go on the Guernsey website, which is a British protectorate between the UK and France, they're all about doing an actual real count of inflation, and that's what people have to become cognizant of. And there's no other way to do it.
So does that get rid of the Fed at that point? If we're back to
no,
US
you don't want to get rid of the Fed, but only because of the politics involved. You get rid of the Fed's ability to create debt money and to allow fractional reserve lending, which is another mostly unknown function of the Fed that allows banks to essentially lend out 9 times the money that they actually have. So they have the legal monopoly to simply create money out of nothing, lend it to us for mortgages, then gain the interest that they charge on money they didn't really have. And if we dare not to pay that mortgage on time, then they can foreclose on all of our property and gain it back for pennies on the dollar. So
they stick around, but we end up they maintain monetary policy. But the first step is trying to get rid of, or get back to U.S. note, and then try to get rid of fractional reserve lending. Would that be kind of how you see this?
Well, I think you'd have to do fractional reserve lending at the same time you made the switch to U.S. notes. Gotcha. But if I had my druthers and I could only have one thing, then I'd take the change over to U.S. notes, and then we could worry about fractional reserve lending as something we could do later on. However, Milton Friedman, the famed Nobel Prize winning professor of economics at Stanford University, when he was at Stanford, asked me to send him a pre-release copy of the Money Masters. And of course, I contacted him and asked him. He said, "Yeah, sure, send it to me." So I sent it by Federal Express on a Thursday or Friday, I forget, but he in time so that he'd have it for the weekend. So then he calls me on Monday morning. He says, "Boy, if you kill the Fed and you don't do anything about fractional reserve lending, you've done nothing."
That's awesome.
And
so this was in January or February of 1986 when he was still at Stanford. So he was, and really I had neglected to understand the importance of eliminating fractional reserve lending. So we had to go back to the whole thing and kind of rejigger it a little bit to include that. So we made some appropriate changes, and then he was happy with it.
And that goes back, and that kind of goes back to the supply issue. Fractional reserve banking is another form of manipulating.
Well, it's a control issue. It's a control issue. Because the current monetary system we're under is basically means that we the people, the electorate, has absolutely no control over who controls the quantity, and so we're not living in a republic. Then we're living in an autocracy. And if you want to live in a republic, then the most important function of a sovereign is to be in control, total control, and by delegation, the voting electorate be in total control of the quantity of money.
Have you ever given thought to what that control mechanism would actually look like from a legislative standpoint? Like, how much money? Like, would it be a debate every year? How much new money we would create?
Yeah. And just like at the in the late 1800s, for example, do you know how the U.S. government funded itself for the first 120, 30 years of its existence?
Was it tariffs?
Tariffs and excises. And so every presidential debate that came, every time we elected a president, one of the primary debating points between candidates would the tariffs be set at for the next 4 years? Mm-hmm. And we're talking about a question of, will it be 30% this year or will it be 45% this year? A lot of money. And that's how America very wisely grew into the manufacturing king of the world until we ceded that to China because of tariffs. What did that do? It made us become manufacturing independent. We had to make everything that we used as a national economy right here in the United States. And that's where Made in America came from. And that's what we ceded when we ceded that power to China.
Do you think that started with Lincoln? In the documentary, you were talking about when Lincoln made some changes essentially to our policies, and we started getting away from what we were doing in the past. Do you think that's when that kind of started to get us away from American manufacturing, kind of a slow roll?
Who? Did you say Lincoln?
Yes, Lincoln. President
Lincoln. Lincoln was the guy who installed these.
Right, the greenbacks.
To win the Civil War.
Yeah, so
this was done during the robber baron. This was done during the robber baron era, when the robber barons, giant monopolies, the Rockefeller monopoly, the Carnegie monopoly, J.P. Morgan, all that, were basically had conglomerated enough money unto themselves through fractional reserve lending that they were able to control the politics of the nation.
Gotcha.
So you wouldn't disagree with the idea that controlling the supply of money essentially gets you control over the politics of a nation. I mean, from what you just said, if you can gain enough control over the supply of money, then you can gain enough control over the politics of a nation works.
Well, sure, because you can cause depressions or growth. At your will. You can position yourself correctly, just as Senator Byrd did from North Carolina just before a crash, and then you can position yourself correctly when you know you're about to cause a great boom. And this doesn't happen overnight, of course, but over time, once you figure this out, you can eventually exert tremendous political control over the country, removing that political control from the voting electorate. And once you do that, then you don't have a republic anymore. You have an autocracy of various different flavors.
And there's a lot of great books out there and information for people to really do a deep dive into how those connections have worked. Like Nomi Prinz's book, All the President's Bankers. Obviously your book. There's The Creature from Jekyll Island. There's so many pieces of information out there that connect a lot of dots as far as.
Let your tongue burn with fire to mention The Creature of Jekyll Island while I'm on the.
And
I've said that in front of Ed Griffin personally.
Yeah, I know. I've heard you guys. I've heard your critique of G. Edward Griffin, but I mean, as far as his, I don't know. Whatever you guys disagree on, do you disagree with his assessment of how the Federal Reserve came to be and the powers behind the Federal Reserve and why?
He did a very good job of recounting the history of it, but he leaves out the key importance of continental currency and sovereign money.
And you in your book No More National Debt talked about how and again this goes back to a quantity issue. Or a supply issue is, the continental currency.
No, it's about a control issue. Who controls? Who is in control of the money supply? Will it be rich guys, gold bullion dealers, or will it be the voting electorate with that tends to strengthen a deep and broad middle class?
Correct. But the reason I brought that up is because in your book, you talked about how the continental currency was counterfeited by the British. Right. And so it's not only is it a control issue, but it's also a quantity issue, because if you can counterfeit the supply, whether you're in control of it or not, if you can counterfeit the supply, then you can essentially debase the money still. So that's why there's been this long argument over paper currency versus gold versus whatever. Is it always ends up boiling down to a quantity issue, whether you have control over it or somebody else has control over it, and whether or not you can counterfeit the supply based off of what kind of money you're using. Now, I agree with you that you can use whatever you want as money, right? Because money is just a thing that we agree to transact with. But it's all about how do you fix the counterfeiting problem of money, because that's what Bitcoin is trying to do. I'm not sure that's going to work, but it's an attempt. Correct, right? Using new technology, math. It's more math based because you can't counterfeit math. So it's blockchain. It's well, right. I mean, it's right. So that's the only reason why I brought that up, because I've come when I read your book and you brought up the fact that the Continental was essentially counterfeited by the British, and like you said, it doesn't matter what backs the money; it's all about who controls the quantity. It always boils down to the quantity issue. Control, yes, but always quantity. So whether you have the ability to counterfeit or not is the key point. So because human beings, if that's under political control, then that is our responsibility as voters. Sure, we don't elect a counterfeiter. I don't disagree with you there, but there's so many other mechanisms involved in how people get their information, through the media and which way the media is slanted, and
propaganda,
propaganda and all that stuff. So there's so many different. The problem is there's so many different areas of attack that people who are smart will use in order to manipulate and subvert the system into what they want it to be instead of what we want it to be.
But look, I mean, look what we're going through right now. This year, this has been the most organized, seditious propaganda war that's been perpetrated on the United States in American history. And yet, it looks like we're about to beat it. How did we beat it? How could we possibly have beaten it? With look at the propaganda tools that they've deployed. Do you know that any time I mention hydroxychloroquine, for example, on my YouTube channel, it's immediately and instantly demonetized.
Mm-hmm.
So I can't make any money on that. And they're doing that. They do it in a bunch of sneaky ways too. And maybe I shouldn't just go into it. I might lose my channel, but. So, for example, I'll tell you one thing they do. They'll monetize it, and then you have to, of course, apply for a correction or whatever they call it, protest or whatever. And then as soon as they see that most of the monetization ability of that video is gone, then they'll magically remonetize it, so that you can gain 1% of what you would have gotten. And, it's evil and they're doing it. And it's just part of their propagandistic control of a medium which they have a monopoly over. And they're using, the FCC could easily step in and put a halt to this because they're using public airwaves to do this.
That's true. But then we'd be relying on the government institution to essentially, the way I see it is that this whole system, the root cause of this whole system is the way the money system works. And when that started, it started a chain reaction of networking, high wealth individuals networking between each other when it comes to government and when it comes to banking and when it comes to, how, essentially the growth of government, how it's infiltrated its way into all of our daily lives, the way we get information, the way we communicate with each other. So I think I agree with you. I actually think that this time that we're living in now, the internet age, is probably the best chance that we have to actually fixing it and righting the ship. Because, from a military perspective, the quickest way to destroy your enemy is to remove their ability to communicate, right? It's the most efficient way to destroy your enemy is to get them to be able to lose their ability to communicate within themselves. So
maybe because we've certainly lost a significant portion of that ability to communicate accurate news. But look, we're winning. Why do you exist? Why do I exist on YouTube? Even, somehow this ragtag little band of truth perpetrators is winning the day.
I agree. And I think that, and like I said, I think that the internet and the ability for people like me and you and John and Chris and all the people in our lives to be able to communicate via basically, at the speed of light, across the world is allowing people to share information in a way that we haven't been able to share at any point in human history, right? So it's always taking time for information to spread. And so that the change that was needed in order to fix something, it took a lot longer for that information to spread over time. And now we've got information that can spread at the speed of light. Right?
Yeah, the internet is our power. That's for sure.
Internet is definitely our power, and so I really just wanted to bring you on because the issue of the issue of money itself, what it is, who has control over it, the supply issue is the beating heart issue of what's going on right now. I mean, they're talking about printing $3 trillion here now, $2 trillion there now, they've corrupted the system to the point to where they can print money at any rate, at any amount, and it's just going to it's destroying things from the inside out in this country.
Look what you're saying. You've used on this air, you've used the term print or printing probably 20 or 30 times already.
Or digitize, key it into it.
They're not printing money. They're not printing money. They're borrowing money.
They're printing debt. Right.
Right. Yeah, this is left over from the gold bugs. The gold bugs love to say, "Oh, you are going to print money into infinity, and we're going to be Zimbabwe." Well, we're going to be Zimbabwe if we allow them to do it, but we don't even have the power to stop them from doing it at this point. Let's at least take the power back.
I 100% agree with you, and I think that's where we have to. Like, I just watched the the Libertarian Party's debate. I think it was yesterday or whenever it happened. I mean, it's such an issue of where do we start, right? In the Marine Corps, the second you step off the bus when you join the Marine Corps, every Marine starts their journey as a Marine in the same spot on yellow footprints. So where is America's yellow footprint? Where do we start? It has to start with a money issue. The money issue bleeds into all other issues. Doesn't matter what social issue you want to talk about. Doesn't matter if you're on the right, you want to talk about big government, or if you're on the left, you want to talk about social welfare. Like, it's always an issue of money. And so unless we start at that yellow footprint of the one issue that affects all other issues, then we're never really going to get anywhere. So,
but there's something else even above that. It's an issue of control. The money issue is just an issue of control. The leftists want to control everything. The freedom-loving patriots of this country believe that America is the land of the free and the home of the brave, and that's a control issue. We want to have a republic. We want to have our voice be able to impact and control our government, and that's what's being taken from us. And it's being taken from us through the money issue.
I agree with you 100%. 100% agree with you. So that's really that was the reason why we wanted to bring you on, just to kind of clarify, some things because our audience is your everyday average American, and your everyday average American, doesn't spend a lot of time looking into the Federal Reserve and how money works in this country and why it's even important when it comes to what they're seeing on TV, right? As far as the news goes, I mean, this is the central issue of our time in our country, right? Like, this country is going bankrupt before our eyes. The debt essentially doubles every 10 years, right? So, unless we have conversations like this with people like you who have spent, probably the better part of your life dedicated to this issue of money and the history of it, then I don't see how we're gonna make the next leap forward in this country without having these kind of conversations.
Right.
I think that's a good segue too, as well, Mike. Is so a lot of people I talk to, Mr. Steele, I ask them, "Do you know that the Federal Reserve is a private entity?" And they're all shocked, like, "What?" Like, it's just unclear. I think their naming there was very specific because it makes you think, oh, it's federal, it's the government, not just a central bank. But I'm curious on your take of how. So I heard your plan. President Trump could bring back the U.S. notes, but I'm curious, in today's time, how does he even do that? How does that happen? We're hyper politicized. Anything he did, one side of the country isn't going to like. Anything Obama did, the other side's not going to like, and Bush, and we just do this flip-flopping. And the Congress is set up to where they're not going to allow the other side to get any wins. So if Trump could literally pay down the debt, the Democrats would be like, no, 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 we don't want to do that, and vice versa. Whenever whoever comes in next,
Really? You think the Democrats would attempt to stand on an issue that we don't want to pay down the debt?
yeah, yeah, absolutely. I just think they will
It'd be a
because
loser.
I mean, a lot of things, in the hyper politicization that we have now, a lot of things they're going to do that to where they just don't want to
I do
win.
understand your point. I
Yeah.
do understand your point. And
So how do we get there? Like,
but
I want to
see,
know, like, how do
well,
we?
he doesn't have to explain it. I mean, not one person in a million knows the difference between these. He doesn't have to say that he's paying them off with these. He just does it. In fact, maybe that's what he's doing right now.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
I don't see the debt going up, going down though. The debt seems to be going up at a rapid pace.
Yeah, I don't
And
think they're paying
We don't
attention to
know.
it.
We don't know who paid for that first $2 trillion, though, do we?
They just moved the decimal.
I mean,
Mm.
have you?
That's not the point. He
Yeah.
took that. He made that not under the jurisdiction of the Fed. He made that under the jurisdiction of the Treasury. My theory is he was starting to bring this about in doing so.
That's interesting.
I don't know if I give Trump that much credit, to be honest with you, but I could be wrong. I've been wrong before. I
Well,
mean,
I don't think it would be him. It'd be like Mnuchin and those cats that are back there, that have a stronger grasp of the economics, right?
No, but Mnuchin, I think, would be a force against that because
Right. 'Cause
Mnuchin is the
he's
ultimate
Wall Street.
banker.
Yeah, I forgot he's Wall Street.
But I'll tell you, these bankers don't really understand this either. I mean, they don't. You go in and talk to your branch manager of your bank and ask him if he knows what fractional reserve lending is. He'll go, duh. I mean, they don't know the basics. And even as you go up the chain, the difference between U.S. notes and Federal Reserve notes, I doubt if 400 million understands that
but
in the banking community.
that's a great point because the people that do understand it, the people whose names we don't know, the people at the very top, they understand how all this works, and they understand that it's an issue of control and an issue of power, and those people don't give up power easily. They have all sorts of tricks in their bags. They have all sorts of tactics in their bags. I mean, in my mind, in order to do what you're presenting, you're essentially talking about going to war with a class of people that have had a particular type of control over this country and the world. And let me tell you, Bill, if you want to go to war with those people, you better be willing to sacrifice your life, your liberty, and whatever you can think of, anything that you can think of, you better be willing to sacrifice it, because the type of war that you're talking about is the kind of war that human beings have been fighting forever, like the war against slavery. So those wars don't end well. They don't end pretty, and they don't end without a fight. So, I applaud your ideas as far as how to fix it, and I agree with you, but the type of fight that is ahead in order to actually make that happen is one that, I don't think maybe 1 in a million has even considered the outcome or the pain that has to happen in order to get through to the other side. If you're going to have
that has to happen, what do you think's happening today?
Oh, I know.
There's going to be political consequences for this that no leftist, red Chinese communist can possibly anticipate.
I think your documentary did a good job of showing that as well, of just kind of breaking down over time throughout the years, regardless of what it was, whether it was the tally sticks and moving forward, how much pushback people received from that. And along with Mike's point, I think that's another point of, that I'm wondering is how do we get beyond those things? Like with Andrew Jackson, the things that he did and, all the pushback that he got and how we basically reversed and went back to banking another way. Like, how do we get beyond those people? And I get Trump just using the U.S. notes to pay down debt, but how do we actually change the Fed.
Well, we're there. What's going to happen once 5, 6, $7 trillion worth of additional debt hits? What's going to happen? There's going to have to be taxation to pay for it. I mean, just if you count the increase in the interest rate payments from that debt, it's going to be a doubling of the 450 billion up to $1 trillion a year. And when you're spending $1 trillion a year on nothing of intrinsic value for the vast majority of the voting electorate, and they're going to have to make that up out of their paychecks, don't you think that's going to have some type of a political consequence? And, I think it's happening right now. I think they've already taken it too far. I mean, why do I exist? Why does Ellen Brown exist? Why does Ed What's-His-Name exist with The Creature? I mean, because everybody's looking for the solution to this really nasty problem.
Completely agree. Mike, do you have anything else for Mr. Steele? I know we could go on and on about this.
We could go. I could go on talking to you for days. I'm telling you right now. I think we started.
This has been a challenging interview, and difficult for me to be rousted from a deep nap and try to make my aging brain function to operate at this level. But it's been fun and productive, and these things needed to be kicked around. You talk about libertarian. Did you guys know that I ran for the nomination of the Libertarian Party for president in 2012?
I did. I watched the debates. I forgot to mention that at the beginning. Yes, I did know that.
And little did I realize just how messed up the Libertarian Party is. I mean, there's a good third to a half of them that are hardcore anarchists.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They don't believe in the republic. They believe in some weird view of anarchy. And man, when I figured that out, I just went, I'm out of here.
Yeah, the Libertarian Party has a lot of problems. I'm not gonna argue that.
They're not really interested in liberty at all. They're interested in, I don't know. I don't even want to go there.
Well, libertarians like arguing with each other. There's really no. I mean, everybody's worried about who's more libertarian than the other person. This goes back to my point that I was making before: is where's the starting point? Everybody's got this end goal that they want to get to, but where do we all start? Right?
We're being forced to the starting point. That's just it. I think this is it. I mean, when you start increasing the national debt by a significant percentage per year, like 10, 20, 30%, I don't think there's any place you can go but start looking for a solution to this. Mm-hmm. This can't go on,
and that's
because we're going to have to pay for it in taxation.
And that's why we're having this conversation, because eventually you can only grind people into the dirt for so long via taxation that until there's a breaking point, right? And the country's so divided right now, left, right, that if a breaking point happens, or when it happens, nobody's going to really know why it happened. And that's why we have people like you on to kind of help your everyday average person try to figure out why. Like, why is all this happening right now? Like, let's get Bill Still's perspective when it comes to money. Let's get somebody else's perspective when it comes to agriculture. Let's get somebody else's perspective when it comes to the healthcare issue. Like all these.
Yeah, but I mean, right now it's the breaking point has been brought about by China's low intensity conflict thing that they put together here, and it's not over yet.
Oh yeah, well we don't have time to go into foreign policy and all those kinds of issues on this call, but. Bill, I just want to say I know the podcast kind of started out with maybe a little pushback on maybe some misinterpretations on where we saw things as far as money goes. I want you to know that we really appreciate you coming on the podcast. I agree with, almost everything that you have to say when it comes to money and the issues that we're dealing with right now. And I would very much love for you to maybe come back one day and kind of have this conversation, continue the conversation. And, I wish you and Beth the best. And I appreciate you doing what you're doing out there to help educate people. It's an important issue. You've been researching into it and dedicate your life to it for a long time. So I just want to say thanks.
Yes, send me the link. I want to put it up on my channel too.
Absolutely. I'll put the link in the chat in a moment. Chris, do you have any closing thoughts before we get out? I know you've just been sitting back enjoying the conversation.
Yeah, one of the things I'd like to say is, Bill, I'm a huge proponent. John and I come from very small town America, very rural small town America where, most education stops somewhere around high school or right after high school. We could go on for days again talking about how small town America has been impacted by a large, variety of different policies and changes in the economy as, the years have gone on. But one of the things that I'm a huge proponent of is learning. I listening to individuals like yourself talk who are, professionals and experts on certain things. And I definitely appreciate your time, because being able to sit back and listen and learn today, this episode will be something that I remember for a very long time.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity. It was, like I say, it was a different format, and I look forward to sticking it up on my channel. Absolutely.
We appreciate that. And that's, and I think that's the big thing, we kind of touched on it with the propaganda in this country. And, I checked out of Facebook for about 16 months and just completely stepped away from it and came back and realized that I missed virtually absolutely nothing. And it's exactly that. We as individuals, I think, need to continue to be curious about each other, respect each other's opinions, and ultimately come back to the table and realize, like you said, we're at the starting line right now, and we need to be able to figure out how to work together to continue to move a path forward. And I think now, is as good a time as ever to do it. We have to do it. We're forced to do it, because if not, where we go from here is, I wouldn't say scary, but it's an uncharted path, so to speak. So I think we need to continue to have conversations like this. I would urge everyone to have conversations like this. And, at the very worst case, listen, listen to what you're curious about, find things that you're curious about, seek different opinions on it, and, work forward, because today, like I said, is something that I'll not only remember for a while, but I definitely appreciate your input on a lot of these things, because it was a very honor to be able to have you on today. And I appreciate you, taking the time out of your day to do it, even with the difference in format. I was telling John while you were talking, one of the things that I appreciated the most is that you were able to just have a very fluid conversation and discuss some of these topics. Now what ends up happening if you go on some type of major news network, et cetera, is you end up getting talked over for, 40 to 50% of your time. And then you end up back to square one, which you've accomplished exactly nothing, which major news networks a lot of times is the goal. So for you to come on and just be able to speak fluidly and candidly about what you believed, we absolutely appreciate it, because one of the things that John and I and Mike see is, we are the future of this country. All of us are under 40. All of us believe that the importance of being able to have these conversations is really the key to be able to move forward. And the ones that are not, that are sitting back and waiting, are going to be behind the 8 ball, and it's like I told John, when America started kind of reopening and governors were making decisions and mayors were making decisions, it's like, if you don't voice your opinion, if you don't have these conversations and you allow someone else to make these decisions for you, don't be surprised if you're upset and disagree with those decisions because you didn't voice your opinion and your concerns. So again, I appreciate you quite a bit today, man. This could be a Sunday to remember.
The good thing about America is that, we don't immediately go to arms. We've even I said, okay, well, we'll try this social distancing thing. But now I realized this was all a giant hoax. That social distancing is the worst thing you can do. We need to shake each other's hands. Why? Because we give each other our little individual germs at a very low dose rate, where our immune systems can, create what we need to counter anything that's bad. It's just the worst thing you can do. Stay out of the sunlight. Sunlight kills the virus.
So we actually had a friend of ours on that was one of my college roommates as well that, got sick with the coronavirus. He was one of the first confirmed cases in San Antonio, Texas, and he recovered from it. His wife's a physician. One of our other good friends is a physician. He actually went and donated plasma, immediately afterwards. And he said exactly that. He said, kind of to that effect, he said, look, as politically incorrect that it maybe is to say, some of us that are healthy are going to have to get sick and be able to donate plasma and platelets to the individuals that are sick, because it's right now, without the cure, it's the only way that we continue to move forward. And he donated 8 bags of plasma. And, with the success that he had, it's just been great.
Mrs. Steele,
there's medicine for this.
Bill, I love it, Bill. I love it.
So for those of you listening, Mrs. Steele was holding up some tablets, some hydroxychloroquine tablets.
Yeah. And if you don't want to buy that, you can just go to your grocery store and buy tonic water with quinine. Quinine is the essential ingredient.
Nice.
I would for sure say consult your physicians before you do anything yourself. It's hard to know, especially from a medical standpoint, what works and what doesn't, because everybody's body's different and reacts differently to everything. So I would just say consult your physician if you're gonna try and do anything yourself. But
that's why it got so far, because there's never been a time when America was so buffaloed by erroneous medical opinion. This whole Dr. Fauci thing, I mean, he'd say one thing one day and another thing another day. I mean, they're just making it up. They're making stuff up. They have no idea. And it turns out to be exactly wrong. I mean, that's what they wanted. They want us to all hunker down and destroy the economy when, we can fix it with stuff we can buy at the grocery store.
We have to bring you on, and we could go down a whole rabbit hole on that.
But make you a regular guest, Bill, one of these days. So
still, I put the link in the show note. I mean, in the chat here for our episode 57 that was talking about Paul Bazadua's experience when he got sick and the micro exposure. So there's definitely something to what you're saying in terms of having micro exposures in that sense. But I want to echo everyone's sentiments. We definitely appreciate you coming on. It's been amazing. I loved your documentary. It taught me so much, just about money in general. And I love the historical context that it gives. So thank you for all your time. Everyone, you can find Mr. Steele at Bill Steele on Twitter, and you can also find him on YouTube. I have the link on the website. Go check it out at pfapodcast.com. And you can also find us at PFA Podcast on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And we just want to thank our great guest here, Mr. Steele, and appreciate you taking time out your nap for joining us, sir.
Can you email me the link? I'm kind of old school,
Yes, sir.
I'm one generation older than you guys,
Yes, sir.
And this knowledge absolutely depends on you guys being able to pick it up and carry it onwards. Because
thank you.
And
I'm barely able to function right now as far as just having a coherent conversation. This is the most coherent conversation I've had in many interviews. Let's put it that way.
We appreciate that.
That's great to hear.
The good part out.
Yeah, and
we appreciate that.
And
send me an email link. I need an mail link.
We'll definitely get that out to you ASAP.
Okay.
So, thank you very much, Mr. Steele.
Enjoy your Sunday.
Have a great rest of your Sunday, Bill.